I want to thank all of you for coming, and at this time I'd like to introduce our speaker today, and Don Veinot. He and his wife is here. Joy, you want to stick your hand up over there? And looks like they've brought family and friends, and we want to welcome all of you. Don is, how do I describe him? He's multi-talented. He has a construction background. He helped found an organization called Midwest Christian Outreach, counter cult organization. And I know he's done extensive counseling along that line, as well as addiction counseling. He's written all kinds of articles, and his wife is a very excellent writer also. And at this time, I've set it up, so Don Veinot, we'd like to have you come forward and welcome you. Thank you.
Thank you. It's good to be here. I'm going to have to do something a little unusual here before we get too started. I want everyone to stand up for a minute and face that wall. Reach out in front of you and massage the shoulders of the person in front of you.
Shoulders, not hips.
All right, now, let's everyone turn the opposite direction and repeat the procedure. Oh, good, okay. Now you feel awake and rejuvenated, you can sit down now. I'm going to ask you a difficult question. Why did you do that? But who am I? Most of you have never met me before. Other than Ralph told you I was going to be speaking, he didn't say you could trust me.
We didn't say empty their wallets in front of them.
I'm not a word faith teacher, so I didn't say empty your wallets and God will double it or anything like that. I did that to do this. We need to be discerning. We need to think about what somebody's saying and ask them to define sometimes the reason they're asking us to do something or the vocabulary they are using. Definitions become very important in life, and we can become easily confused when we assume things that are not what the speaker, writer, communicator is telling us. We can't just believe everybody just because they seem to be in authority. I have written a number of articles. We have our journal, several of them out there, and we deal with, as a ministry, with religious issues, obviously, cults, counter-cults, world religions. What do atheists believe or not believe? How do we talk with Hindus? What's the Jehovah's Witness believe? But I also engage in cultural issues. For example, the issue of abortion. So we have an article out there, human rights only for some humans. Because, in my opinion, we are misdefining the argument. And so if we can put the right definition on it, we have more of a chance of persuading others to understand what the issues are at hand. My wife came, fortunately for me, she's a smart one in the group, and she will try to keep me on task. If she starts rolling her eyes, I'll know I'm in trouble. I was going to bring pictures of my grandkids because I'm a grandparent, I love talking about my grandkids, but I was blessed to be able to bring them in person instead. And so if you want to know anything about me, you can ask them and they will gladly tell you. Why don't we open in prayer? Father, we thank you for this opportunity to gather together in your house. I thank you for each one that's here, and I know that in this group there are a variety of needs. Some people are crying out to you for guidance or provision, Lord. I ask that you would answer them resoundingly. Others are just fearful of life. Some are really greatly encouraged and need to share that with those around them. whatever they are, Lord, we ask that you would touch each one of us, open our ears, open our hearts, and open our minds, and help us to understand the things that are close to your heart. We pray this in Christ's name. Amen. All right, we're going to start out with a little story. It's not a true story, it's just a story. But it bears on this idea of why definitions and asking questions are important. About 100 years ago, the Pope decided that all of the Jews had to leave the Vatican. So there was an outcry among the Jewish community. And they didn't know what to do, so they asked the Pope for a debate. And if the Jews won, they could stay. If the Pope won, they would leave. And the Pope agreed. So they looked around and they picked a middle-aged man named Moish to represent them. And Moish asked for one addition to the debate, just to make things more interesting. Neither side would be allowed to talk. And the Pope agreed. So they met for the day of the debate. The Pope and Moish sat opposite each other for a few minutes. And then the Pope raised 3 fingers. And Moish raised 1. The Pope waved his fingers in a circle around his head, and Moish, without hesitation, pointed to the ground where he sat. The Pope took out a wafer and a glass of wine. Moish took out an apple. The Pope stood up and said, "I give up. This man is too good. The Jews can stay." A little while later, the Pope was gathered with the bishops, and they said, "What happened there?" And he said, "Well, first, I raised 3 fingers to represent the Trinity. And he raised 1 finger to remind me there was one God common to both of our religions. I waved my fingers in a circle around my head to show that God was all around us, and he pointed to the ground to remind us that God was right here with us. I took out a wafer and a glass of wine to demonstrate that God absolves us from sin. And he took out an apple to remind me of original sin. He had an answer for everything. What could I do?" Back in the Jewish community, they said, "So what happened?" I said, "Well, first," he said, "you Jews have 3 days to get out of town." And I said, "Not one of us is leaving." And then he said this whole city would be cleared of Jews. And I said, "We're going to stay right here." And then, I don't know, he took out his lunch, so I took out mine. Definitions are critically important, but we don't know what we're talking about. We have 3 points that I'll describe as why are we here? What is the purpose of our existence? These were kind of given to me by a friend. I had really roughed out what I was going to talk about, and I thought this really helps me to kind of streamline into 3 points, 3 things. The first one is meaning. If you are taking notes, you can write that down. The second one is why are we in this building? What is our purpose for being here before one another? We can call that one ministry. What is our purpose in culture? We need to define each of these, and that one would be mission. So for those who feel the spirit of sleep coming upon them at any time, you already know the concept of my talk, basically. Everything from here is telling stories. So if you take a nap, you know that we're talking about meaning, ministry, and mission. So the first one is, why are we here? What is the purpose of our existence? What is the meaning? I have a friend who was raised as a Hindu. He grew up in India. His name was Ravi. And Ravi was a devout Hindu. He really wanted to find God. And he did all of the rituals and practices. He practiced yoga, Kundalini yoga, as a matter of fact. And now he describes it, he says it is really a terrifying thing because you really are fooling with demons. And so he met a young lady, though, when he was in college. She was a Christian. And they spent a lot of time talking about why are we here, what is, the purpose and meaning to life. And he said her answer to me was simple and profound and shook my world, and I had to start searching things out. I was always looking for my meaning and what am I supposed to do, as though somehow I could make the world better in some way. And so her response was simple: to glorify God. He said, I didn't know how to deal with that. And so he went on a search, and the search ended bringing him to Christianity. And he realized that all of the works he had been doing, all the rituals he had been performing, all the stuff that he had been anguishing over were really answered by that one little point of meaning. I'm here to glorify God. That's my purpose. That gives me meaning in life. That gives the church meaning in our existence, to glorify God. The Bible is replete with examples of people wandering away from their original purpose. We see it all the way back as far as the garden. Simple, don't eat the fruit. Glorify God. What did they do? Ate the fruit. We can follow through and see example after example of this, but I really want to go and hone in on one kind of in a particular group. We're going to break into the middle of the story in the book of Isaiah. Now, at this time, we have a split in the nation. We have the 10 tribes and the 2 tribes. We have Israel and Judah. It's a family squabble of sorts. And so Judah is visited by a prophet by the name of Isaiah, who says this in Isaiah 2:5-8. Come, house of Jacob, and let us walk in the light of the Lord. For you have abandoned your people, the house of Jacob, because they are filled with influences from the east. They are soothsayers like the Philistines. They strike bargains with the children of foreigners. Their land has also been filled with silver and gold. There is no end to their treasures. Their land has also been filled with horses, and there is no end to their chariots. Their land has also been filled with idols. They worship the work of their hands, that which their fingers have made. Judah had largely abandoned their relationship with God and replaced it with other things while claiming to serve Him. They had made alliances with Egypt, which turned out to be fruitless because Egypt was conquered, although they started adopting some of their practices and rituals. Manasseh came along as their king and began instituting pagan rituals and idol worship. And the land is following behind. The Philistines are there, and they're making deals with them and intermarrying, and even though God had said, don't do that. We see the nation of Israel has a cycle of following close to God and then wandering far away. It's sort of the human condition, isn't it? C.S. Lewis writes in the Screw Tapes about what we will call the theory of undulation, where the client, so to speak, gets close to God and falls far from God, and gets close to God and falls far from God. And as Screwtape is writing to his nephew Wormwood, he says we need to really hone in on times he's far from God, because that's where we're going to have our best chances of distracting him from following God truly. Israel did the same thing. They based their relationship to following strange gods and practices while thinking, or at least claiming, to be loyal to God. This passage in Isaiah describes a state of God's called out people this way. They were imitating culture. They were making alliances with non-believers. They were accumulating financial wealth. They were accumulating material possessions. They were replacing biblical worship with the worship of idols and a commitment to stuff. You know, I have to tell you, when I look around, this could just as well have been written to the church today. Things don't really happen in a vacuum. We don't just wake up one morning and it's like it is. There's a process of getting there. And I kind of like history. I always want to know why things are the way they are. It's never enough for me just to know that they are. The Civil War I'm very interested in. My wife and I, when we travel, we try to find if there's a Civil War site and we go and see it. Why? It was a terrible, terrible time in our nation's history. The carnage was unbelievable. Brothers fighting against brothers. Why? What motivated that? And then you go to the battlefields and you start seeing not only where the battles took place, but you have letters written from a husband to a wife, or a son to his father, or a brother to a brother, and you get a real sense of the people there and the times and why they did that. Same is sort of true here. How did we get to where we're at? We're going to, again, break into the story, but we're going to break into the first century. The first century culture and today are sort of bookends in time. In the first century, the Roman Empire would begin something we'll call a Greco-Roman enculturation. In other words, when they conquered a people, they immediately set about to make them like the rest of the Romans. They established a process of transforming culture through architecture, laws, and education, although they allowed the conquered people to hold on to their heritage and practice some limited self-government. The process of what's called syncretization, or combining the two things, was an ongoing one. I've been to Israel twice, and it's great. I love going there to see the places and to walk the lands and to get a sense of what Jesus was talking about when he's telling his stories. The second time I was there, I had a great opportunity of running into a fellow believer who's a friend of mine. He's an elder at First Baptist Church of Jerusalem. Imagine that's kind of a cool thing. When we hit Israel that night, it was tired. It was about 8 o'clock at night. We had dinner. I called him up and said, "We're here." I thought we'd run into each other the next day. He says, "Okay, you got any energy?" And I said, "Well, maybe. Why?" He said, "I want to pick you up." I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, I'm going to drive you around to a little sightseeing." I said, "It's dark." He says, "Best time, no crowds." Okay, he picks me up, and we drive all around and see these different places. And we went up on the Mount of Olives, and it's about 10 or 11 o'clock at night, clear night, stars shining. We're sitting on the hood of his car looking out over the Kidron Valley. And then he started saying, "This is where the temple is." And so this is where Jesus probably had the Last Supper. And then Judas would have left there and walked over to the temple to turn him in. Jesus and the disciples would have walked from here down through the valley up to the Garden of Gethsemane. Judas and the soldiers went to the house, not there. They come down the valley up to the Garden of Gethsemane. And you can sort of see this thing in your mind's eye. And in that, there's also Roman architecture everywhere. And you have this kind of interesting mishmash of the Jewish culture and the Roman culture from the first century all in the same place. And then you start getting a sense for what was going on when the church was born. In that time, worldview truth claims went like this. The common people thought all truth claims were equally true. You have your truth and I have my truth, and they're different, but they're both equally true. Philosophers viewed all truth claims as equally false. There's really nothing that's true in any objective sense. Politicians viewed all truth claims as equally useful. If I can persuade you that I adopt your truth claim, you'll elect me, and I will then have the power. Who spoke for culture? Caesar spoke for culture. He told you what was true, he told you what to believe, and if you disagreed, he could imprison or kill you. You could believe anything you chose, provided you swore, Kaiser Kyrios, or Caesar is Lord. It wasn't sufficient to affirm another's right to believe what they chose. It was expected that you affirmed the rightness of their beliefs. Christians rejected this, and as a result of their monotheism, they were called atheists. They were called atheists because they didn't adopt the view that all gods were true or equal. They believed there was only one true God, and they voiced that. This helps us better understand Paul's statement in Romans 10, 9 through 13. Does anyone right offhand know what that says, Romans 10, 9 through 13? If you confess with your mouth what? Jesus is the Lord. Isis Kyrios. Paul is putting that against what you must confess in the Roman Empire, which is Caesar is Lord. Paul's going, nah, Caesar's not really God. Jesus is really God. Caesar is just a God wannabe. Most of the New Testament, in fact, is written to correct bad behavior, false teachers, and false teaching, but the Christian worldview impacted virtually all areas of private life: thinking, education, and behavior. There's an interesting book that was put out a few years ago called Under the Influence: How Christianity Transformed Civilization by Alvin Schmidt. He's a Lutheran minister. And he lays out how Christianity transformed the view of women, the view of abortion, the view of infanticide, the practice of pedophilia, and legalized prostitution, among lots of other things. But those were pretty high on the list. I mean, we look at our culture today and we think this is new. This is not new. Abortion was commonly practiced in the first century. It was chemically induced, but the highest ideal for the Roman Empire happened to revolve around the area of sexuality. And so having children could impede your pleasure. And so getting rid of them was commonly accepted. Infanticide: when a child was born, the mother would take the child and lay it at the foot of the father, and he had two choices to make. He could leave it, he could uncover it, which meant we're not keeping it. You're going to take it up and get rid of it. Or he would leave it covered, and that meant we'll keep it. Children were not of high value. And Christians started doing this odd thing. They would go out looking for abandoned children and bring them back and raise them as their own. Started transforming how culture viewed children. The practice of pedophilia: most men of means had a young boy, about my Nathan's age, about 12. They were called catamites. They were for the sole purpose of sexual gratification of the man. Interesting culture. Legalized prostitution. Most of the women of means, in fact, registered as prostitutes. That way, if they had an adulterous affair, they couldn't be prosecuted for adultery because they're registered prostitutes. The last pagan emperor of Rome, Julian the Apostate, he grew up in a home where his mother was a Christian. He never adopted a Christian faith. He attempted to re-paganize the world, and he funded the building of pagan temples and pagan priesthood. It was not being very effective, and so he wrote to a priest of Galatia instructing him to do something that we might find interesting. He said, you need to start acting like those Christians if we're going to have any chance of transforming culture. You need to start acting like Christians. He writes this: why do we not notice that it is their kindness to strangers, their care for the graves of the dead, the pretended holiness of their life, that have done the most to increase atheism? I believe that we ought really and truly to practice every one of these virtues. And it is not enough for you alone to practice them, but so must all of the priests in Galatia, without exception. In the second place, admonish them that no priest may enter a theater or trade that is base and not respectable. In every city, establish hostels in order that strangers may profit by our generosity. I do not mean for our people only, but for others who are also in need of money. For it is disgraceful that when no Jew ever has to beg, and the impious Galileans, or Christians, support both their own poor and ours as well, all men see that our people lack aid from us. He says, their behavior is proving to be an embarrassment to us. The poor come along, not just their poor, our poor, and what do? They feed them. They put them up in rooms. They make sure that they're cared for. They care for the graves of the dead. We don't value life. They value life. They take care of the women in a way that we don't. They take care of children in a way that we don't. And it was such a problem for Julian because he could not get people to get interested in the pagan idol worship that he so loved. And so he writes to the priest and says, you need to start acting like those Christians if we're going to get people into our places of worship.